So welcome to our meeting. What I'd like to do first is call the meeting to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Here.
Peggy Mueller Aragon,
Here.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Here.
Barbara Peterson,
Here.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Here.
Courtney Jackson,
Here.
Josefina Dominguez.
Here. Okay, so our meeting format, while we're calling this the Capital Outlay Property and Technology Committee meeting, we're going to have a conversation about that. But these meetings will be hybrid meetings with community members having a choice to attend in person at the John Milne Community Boardroom or virtually at www.aps.edu. Presenters will attend virtually. You may participate by attending the meeting in person, watching live stream of upcoming meetings by clicking on the live meeting stream button on the main board page at www.aps.edu, emailing input, comments, and questions to board members at boarded@aps.edu, or calling 505-880-3729. And so our first item for consideration is adoption of the January 9th, 2023 Capital Outlay Property and Technology Committee meeting for this particular agenda. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved. This is Josefina.
I'll second. This is Barbara.
Have a roll call, please.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Oh, wait, wait. I meant before we did that is one of the things that I wanted to do was to move the item for the board president announcement of right sizing working group lead and group members. I'd like to move that after the special issues. So if we could, I would like to propose that as a friendly amendment to those that motioned and seconded. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, roll call, please.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Peggy Mueller Aragon,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Okay, so our first item will be special issues, and this is an update on right sizing committee recommendations. Dr. Gabriela Duran Blakey, Chief Operations Officer, Kizito Wajenje, Executive Director of Capital Master Plan. You have the floor, and we'll look forward to the presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the committee. This evening, I have with me the members of the Right Size Committee. And so they are here also to answer any questions you have at the end of the presentation. We have Dr. Chanel Segura, the Chief of Schools, Amanda DeBell, Associate Superintendent for Learning Zone 3, Mark Garcia, Executive Director of the Office of Innovation, Kizito Wajenje, the Executive Director of the Capital Master Plan, Kaylin Finnell, APS Senior Planner and Manager of the Capital Master Plan, Rosalinda Montoya, APS Executive Director of Budget, and Julianne Hicks, APS Senior Director of Budget. And those are the members that have been working on this committee for the past few months. And just some history before we go into the details of the recommendations is in 2015, we started the Right Size Committee here in the school district. And in 2016 was the first presentation to the school board to go over findings of the Right Size Committee. The committee created a technical methodology and intention of operating more efficiently as a district, while at the same time ensuring high academic outcomes and quality of academic offerings. As we go through the information in front of you, you should all have with you, we want to remind you that this is a right sizing recommendation. Right sizing is a term that is adopted to ensure that the district remains both academically and financially viable, while also ensuring that equity and access are maintained to all of our families. What you'll see in the report today is the recommendations to keep up with changing district needs as well as state and federal educational mandates, to operate cost effectively and efficiently, while at the same time ensuring high academic outcomes and the quality of academic offerings, mitigating the rising marginal costs of operating the district, reversing the student enrollment losses by enhancing and maintaining quality of offerings, as well as expanding academic variety, which you'll see in some of the recommendations to actually increase enrollment, and being proactive in order to facilitate for new universal early childhood learning mandates with the early childhood expansion. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Wajenje to go over the right sizing rubric and the variables used in the
Thank you very much, members of the board, Superintendent Elder. The committee, starting 5 years ago, came up with what we call the right sizing rubric or variables as to how we shall go about doing this. Before you, if you look on page 3, you will see what those variables are. And to summarize them, we looked at 6 major variables. That was financial and operational. That was the first one. Level of capital investment into our facilities. That was the second one. School enrollment, school capacity, transfer trends and patterns for every individual school. That was the third variable. The urban zoning trends of the school's attendance area. That is the fourth variable. And this is an interesting variable because attendance areas of schools have changed over time. There are schools that were wholly residential in their attendance area 30 years ago. And now they're wholly commercial and there's no looking back. And so we do an analysis on that in terms of looking to see how viable that school will be as a neighborhood school. Then we looked at equity and socioeconomics, and I'll go a little bit into what we considered equity, which is basically and the socioeconomics, which is free and reduced lunch. And then the last thing was academic outcomes and proficiency. And the reason we did these variables the way we did them, as we did the analysis, it was very clear that we have to balance between just looking at the operation of school financially and looking at the cost benefit analysis and balancing that with equity and socioeconomics of the schools. Because as you know, academic outcomes and proficiency are in many cases related to where the school is at and what the baseline of that community is. So if we go back to page 2, you will see a flow chart. And what we did is we started with a baseline of all 88 elementary schools, 27 middle schools, and the 2 K-8 major schools. And what we did is in the first tier, we did what is called filtering out. We filtered out, we looked at capital investment. Basically, if a school had received over $10 million in capital investment by the taxpayer over the last 20 years, it was filtered out. If the school had been strategically determined as a special education hub, and it was developed as a special education hub because of its enrollment and the surrounding area needs, it was filtered out. And then schools with a high utilization rate, which means 70% or more occupation over a period of 5 years, those schools were filtered out, which means based on those 3 variables, schools were taken off the table. You know, if they were very highly utilized, if they were 70% full, if they were special ed heavy, and if they had a large capital investment. And so when we did that first run of filtering out, it resulted in 22 elementary schools, 4 middle schools. Out of the 88 elementary schools, 27 middle schools, and 2 K-8s. So we remained with 22 elementary schools and 4 middle schools. So we then went to the tier 2. And in the tier 2, we then, of these 22 elementary schools and 4 middle schools, we assigned a score based on a rubric. So basically, the way this worked is that the higher the score, the more probable the school is as a candidate for right sizing, to be considered for right sizing. And so the first score was based on utilization rate. And so if you go back to page 3, you will see, and these will be in yellow and in green. That the ones that say green. So we looked at how full empty the school is, which means if the emptier the schools, they were given a higher score. So if you are emptier, you are more of a candidate for repurposing. Then we looked at the percentage of classrooms in portables. If the school had a higher percentage of classrooms in portables, it was given a higher score. So it was more a candidate for repurposing. And the rationale for that is either you spend millions of dollars replacing those portables, or you repurpose the school as is. The third variable was electrical costs per square foot. And this is basically the operational cost of running a specific school. So the higher cost per square foot means that the building is not efficient, which means the building is a lot older, which means it needs a lot more investment, which means it's a higher candidate for repurposing. The next score was a facility score, which is the 5-year master plan architectural evaluation. So if the school, so the way that works, if you remember from the master plan presentation, the closer to 100%, the better the facility is. So most of our schools are between 80 and 90. So if the school had a lower score, it means it was a better candidate for right sizing. Then we went to operational cost per student. So basically, we looked at the operational budget of the school and how many students there are. And basically, if the school had a higher operational cost to run, which means it did not have many students. So it was one of the candidates, higher candidates for right sizing. Now, all those technical perspectives were balanced out with some balances where we actually took points away. So even if a school had less kids, but it had a high special education percentage, it means that we took out some points to balance it out in terms of being suitable for right sizing. If the school had higher percentages of English language learners, so this is an equity kind of balancing, so we took some points away to make it balance out from a purely financial consideration. And also, if the school was Title I, if it was a Title I school, which is also an equity piece, we took points away to balance it out. And lastly, if the free and reduced lunch percentage was high in the school, because we have schools that are 100% free and reduced lunch. So those ones got a balancing, maybe -2 or -3 points were taken off to balance the purely technical and financial considerations. Now, if the transfer rate of the school was high, which means a transfer in rate, which means that school is, for whatever reason, is a highly sought school, we also gave it a lower score, which means it's less of a candidate for right sizing, because for some reason, people are voting with their feet for that school. But if the transfer rate, out rate is higher, means that this is a less sought after school, for whatever reason, it's more of a candidate for right sizing. The zoning ratio of the attendance area, commercial to residential. If a school over the last 20 years and working in conjunction with the city and the county, it seems like the neighborhood is trending from residential to commercial to heavy commercial. It means that some neighborhoods that were previously residential are now commercial and will remain commercial because of the infrastructure the city and the county is putting in there. Those become more candidates for right sizing. And then we looked at test scores and proficiency. And in this, the lower the proficiency, the higher the score. And basically what we did in the test scores, we looked at science, English language arts, math, scores from 2021, 2022. And those were all balanced out by the socioeconomic scores. So basically, in a nutshell, if you look at page 3, though, that's how we did the different tiers. And once we ran that tier, and if you look at page 4 and 5, you will see how the school scored. From highest score to lowest score. And so you'll see the tier 1 schools, and then you'll see the tier 2 schools. So when we ran the tier 1 schools with the scoring, we came up with 5 elementary schools and 3 middle schools. And they are listed there on page 5. And those other schools, we shall be bringing the recommendation on proposals to right size them based on the analysis. And Dr. Blakey will start talking about that.
So the next part of your packet, so each of those schools that came out on tier 2 and what the recommendation is.
Page 6.
It's on page 6. So the first one is Duranus Elementary School. Duranus Elementary School recommendation for a broader plan for early childhood expansion. And this would redistrict all of Duranus elementary students to Reginald Chavez and Cochiti Elementary School. It also would result in additional classroom space at Reginald Chavez and Cochiti Elementary School as part of the move for the students, and it would redesign and upgrade Duranus into an early childhood center, which is part of a prototype we have to add more early childhood centers to the district. The second recommendation we have is La Luz Elementary School. For La Luz Elementary School, the recommendation we have is to redistrict all of the current La Luz Elementary School attendance area students to MacArthur Elementary School. MacArthur would then need an addition of classroom space for their cafeteria, administration, and then music and art and general education classrooms for the La Luz students. This would also be the recommendation to add the second early childhood center based on the prototype design we have for early childhood centers across the district. The third recommendation, and I preface all of these with, at the next part of the presentation, we'll go through a timeline for all of these because each one of these situations are unique in the rollout of what it would need to move forward on. So the next one is Kirtland Elementary School. This would also be a repurpose for an early childhood center. However, this particular recommendation is contingent on a land swap with the US Air Force Base, who have approached us for swapping the land across where the Maxwell housing used to be for the land of Kirtland. So it's across Gibson, basically, is where they want to swap the land. So it would be building the early childhood center on the land swap with the Air Force Base, and then the Air Force Base would then have where the current Kirtland Elementary School is. So because it's a land swap, this would be in a complete rebuild of new construction for an early childhood center that would be north of Gibson Boulevard. The fourth recommendation is Polk Middle School. Polk Middle School, our recommendation is to rebuild Los Padillas Elementary School as a small K-8 school that would accommodate both Los Padillas and Polk Middle School. We also would like to consider the creation of an outdoor learning center facility in conjunction with the Sandia Mountain Natural History Center that we have currently, with revived wetlands at Los Padillas Elementary School. For Polk Middle School, we recommend using it as a new future site for expansion on the southwest side of town, and a multi-use outdoor school, and possibly adding an early childhood site to the new future site. Taft Middle School repurpose. Just for background information, Garfield Middle School, Taft Middle School, and Taylor Middle School are in the North Valley, all within 5-mile corridor, containing 3 of the middle schools that you'll see on the recommendation. So the repurpose of Taft Middle School includes to create a bilingual magnet for middle school for Coronado Elementary School. So it's really expanding Coronado to have a middle school available for them. We've, in looking at the data, and Mr. Garcia is here from that department, we have found that more than 50% of our 5th graders from Coronado have left the district for middle school. And so we're hoping that, as you heard at the beginning, there's also recommendations here on how to retain some students. So this is a recommendation in order to retain the students. The families at Coronado have desperately asked for a middle school feeder for the school. So this would be expanding Coronado's educational model at Taft. This would also mean redistricting Taft Middle School to Taylor and to Garfield. Taylor, just for your information, has already been approved by the latest bond. So we could rebuild the school to scale with a new attendance area based on the construction money that has already been approved for that project. We also recommend Garfield to be, since it is a STEM magnet school, we recommend to make Garfield a no boundary magnet school. So the school would be open across the city and it wouldn't have boundaries by attendance zones. You'll see Alameda Elementary School is on the list, but we recommend that we leave this school as is because in 2008, we were building the school's new gym, and we learned that it is built on a Native American archaeological burial site. So any improvements to Alameda Elementary School that entails digging or ground disturbance is problematic and in a lot of cases impossible. So we've taken Alameda Elementary School off the list for repurposing. As part of our right sizing, we try to look at it holistically across the entire district for what is needed and what the community is asking for. So some of the other right sizing options that we are looking at for consideration is scaling out early childhood centers. We have a sketch of early childhood centers to be throughout the city. So the next 4 early childhood centers would be for land that we have: the far northeast adjacent to Desert Ridge, the far northwest, which is next to Coyote Willow, the near Heights, which is near the Stephen Moody Special Education Complex, and then the South Valley that we spoke about either at Polk or Harrison. The second option for consideration is similar to Coronado. Corrales Elementary School is a small school, elementary school of 500 students. In the last bond, we did receive money to rebuild the school. And we have had a lot of input from that community that they would like it to be a K-8 school. So we do recommend moving Corrales into a K-8 school as we redesign and rebuild it based on the last bond election to be able to move that school into a pre-K to 8 school. That Corrales Elementary School also, when we pulled their data, has more than 50% of their 5th graders who do leave the district after 5th grade. So it's not transferring to out another school. They're zoned for Taylor Middle School, but they leave the school district. So that is another right sizing option to bring students back, and the families have expressed their support to that school being a K-8 school. The third consideration is Janet Kahn School of Integrated Arts. And this is similar to Garfield, where we recommend to remove the attendance boundary of Janet Kahn and make it a pure magnet school of choice, and redistrict the students who are currently zoned for Janet Kahn. We do propose for our schools of choice, the magnet schools, that we have bus stops, 5 bus stops, super stops throughout the district that would be able to bring the students to the school. So that's one of our proposals that we bring with Janet Kahn, is that we would have a similar process that we do with the charter schools, where we would have 5 stops throughout the city that can pick the students up. So for Janet Kahn specifically, if there's a group of students in the neighborhood who want to stay at that school, we would have a super stop at that bus location to Janet Kahn. The next is boundaries changes that are needed to balance out enrollment. And we did look at feeder patterns in these recommendations as we go through the analysis. Most of these are on the far northwest, Tierra Antigua and Sunset View Elementary School, Tony Hillerman and James Monroe, Volcano Vista and Cibola. And then in the southwest, we need to balance out Navajo, Barcelona, Rodolfo Anaya, and Adobe Acres. And those would be boundary shifts for those schools to balance out the enrollment. In looking at our right sizing options, we still do see that we have a deficit of a high school special education hub on the west side that we need to look at for either West Mesa or Cibola High School. And we also are looking at Mountain View, Los Padillas, Polk, and Rio Grande for the magnet school agricultural expansion. And we can move Polk to Los Padillas site if we do continue with that. So you might have heard Mr. Garcia present the information on the grant for Cultivating the Future. And so we can still move forward with that grant, looking at Los Padillas as the K-8 school that would feed in that particular grant. So as I said, we have a timeline for each of these projects that we're proposing, and Mr. Wajinje will walk through just a couple of the timelines, and then you'll be able to see the rest on the packet that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Blakey. So members of the board, superintendent, I'll go through. So the first thing you will see is that for every action proposed, there's an almost equal opposite reaction. So for example, if you make Duranes into an early childhood center, it's not just a matter of taking the kids and putting them in Reginald Chavez and Cochiti. It'll mean that Reginald Chavez and Cochiti will have to be enhanced in capacity to be able to take that extra 150 or so kids. And so right now we do have some funding. Some of it came from the ESSA COVID funds, of which they will be bringing to you, I think, on Wednesday to approve for the design of Cochiti as an early childhood center, and also for a design of a 5-classroom block at Cochiti, and a bigger cafeteria at Reginald Chavez. And so the 2023, which is the first phase, will be design of those. Reboundary of Duranis students will also be done in 2023, proposed, and to take in effect in 2025, because then the classrooms, the extra space has to be redesigned and completed. So 2024, the center and the construction of classrooms, which is still unfunded. It's only funded for the design. So 2024, remodel of the center and construction of the classroom, and 2025, full rollout. The kids will actually leave and go to the new spaces, and the early childhood center will open. So I just wanted to go through one of those because that's something that's already kind of being kicked off. The second thing I wanted to go through will be on your page 9, which will be converting, which will be other right sizing proposal, which will be converting Corrales Elementary School into a small 600 student pre-K through school. So there's the taxpayers have already passed the funding for redesigning and partially rebuilding Corrales. And that will be brought before the board separately because it's a separate issue for you to approve the design additions for the pre-K through 8 school. But what we can do is that the current 5th graders can be the first 6th grade cohort that will go to Corrales as a K through 8 school. There is space for them currently in Corrales to do that. But meanwhile, we have to make sure that the additions are designed this year after you approve them, start construction and finish in 2024. And by the time they get to 7th grade, they will have something that is key for middle school, which is science labs and music and art. And so the plan is finish constructing additions in 2025. And by 2026, current 5th graders will now be in 8th grade. So they will just continue on in Corrales. So that's the second example. The last example, this is something we can do right away, is the enrollment balancing of student attendance areas. You know, on the Northwest, that's the Tierra Antigua, Sunset View, Tony Hillerman, James Monroe, Volcano Vista, and Cibola. And then on the Southwest, the balancing of Navajo, Barcelona, Rodolfo Anaya, and Adobe Acres. That can be done this year and and go into effect in 2024. Last thing, designating Janet Khan as a full magnet. And it'll start in effect 2024, because again, the 5th graders who will make it a magnet will start next year. There's construction finishing up Janet Khan, which should be done by this fall. So by next year, Janet Khan will be ready to be a full magnet. So I'll give it back to Dr. Blakey.
Clarification, full magnet or full K through 8?
Full K through 8 magnet,
Okay.
yes. The facility will be done this year.
So as far as the next steps of the recommendations that we bring before you is we recommend in further work study group meetings to look at each as individuals based on the timing. And some of them have a funding gap, but we can go through each individually based on the timeline, bring those first, particularly looking at those boundary shifts of the far Northwest, far Southwest, and the Garfield and Janet Khan would be kind of the first step. And then going through each of those recommendations individually and further meetings. But we would like to get feedback on the committee's recommendations as well as any questions you have. And again, we do have staff, particularly from the academic side and the school-based side, to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. It's a lot to absorb for sure. So I know that there's a lot of discussion and work that has gone into this. And board members, I think there are two things that are on the table for us. One is just going through and asking questions that we might have right now, but it's also the recommendation that we have a work group that's assigned, some board members that are assigned to work with this team around this, so that we can continue to bring recommendations to the regular board as we're going through, and then finalizing this. So I think what I'd like to do first is to go through, I think, first some of the questions that we have just based on the presentation that was brought before us, so that we can go through those first. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about a work group. And I'm thinking the work group on this will be pretty specific because it's not cutting across the entire district. I think there is definitely areas that are not as highly impacted. And so I think board members that would be part of that would be pretty strategic in terms of who we would assign to help us, to help the district staff as they're working through this, and making sure that we've got board representation on there, and with the conversations that we might have. So why don't we start first with just some of the questions that board members might have around the presentation tonight. Let's try to be succinct because we're not going to have them all answered tonight, obviously. I mean, I think there's a lot of gaps because my brain there's still a lot of gaps. But if maybe we could just go through just a series of quick questions, knowing that we don't have all the answers to this entire timeline, but maybe some real high-level conversation around things that would help this committee as they're going forward. So why don't I start with Board Member Jackson?
Okay, so I think the first thing that really popped out at me was that I don't see any recommendations in here to either repurpose these for charter schools or to close or sell the property. And I was just wondering why.
Board Member Jackson, did you to close charter schools? Or
No, like
offer the
to
charter schools the property?
yes, to offer the property to the charter schools, or to close the buildings and sell them.
So in looking at the repurposing recommendations, we saw in each of those a need for what we propose, a need for expansion into areas that we don't currently have the ability to do, primarily looking at the early childhood hubs. So the first recommendations that are repurposing into early childhood hubs is because we've seen a big increase in the need for early childhood expansion. And at this point, we don't have the facilities behind our ability to serve the community for early childhood. And the facilities for early childhood are very specific to what is needed. So we'd have to repurpose them into that. So that's why our recommendation, primarily at looking at the early childhood, is to renovate those properties, particularly looking at Duranus Elementary School, for example. There's already a charter school that shares basically the fence with Duranus. And so that property itself lends to be a great candidate for the need to fill in early childhood.
Okay. I'm assuming that Board Member Tapia Romero has more questions about early childhood. So you don't necessarily need to answer this, and because she'll probably bring it up, but I just wonder that if these are elementary schools that we can't fill with elementary school children, how likely it's going to be that we can fill them with pre-K. But I'm just going to leave that and I'll let her.
That's answerable.
So, Board Member Jackson, members of the board, one of the things in analysis that we've done since early childhood, given the constitutional amendment passed in effect, what we shall have is mandated early childhood in the state. And in the Albuquerque Public Schools district alone, there are 14,000 3- and 4-year-olds that are going to be covered by this, of which at this time, about 2,800 are being served by both private early childhood providers, APS, CYFD, and the city and the county. The bulk is being done by APS, that is 2,000. Early childhood providers, private ones are doing about 600. And then the rest are being done by the city, county, state, but they're also being done at APS facilities. So if you think about scaling up to 14,000 students, it would not make any sense to give up facilities today and then go back to the taxpayer in the next 5 years and ask them to build up to 15 facilities to serve an extra 14,000 students. That is one of the issues. And then the other issue is that in studying, there's a cost to shuttering underutilized facilities, and selling underutilized facilities will not garner the kind of resources that can then be brought back to support instruction on a recurring basis. That money has then to go back to the same corpus, which is either facilities or capital. And so it's just that's the financial part of it in terms of a cost-benefit analysis.
And just in response to specifically early childhood, this plan, which I suggest at a further meeting, be really looked at just as far as early childhood expansion on its own as a further topic. But this plan involves us being able to have these spaces for multi-use. So we would be able to partner with other agencies that would want to utilize some of the space, because space that is being able to be occupied for early childhood is very specific. So if we have the ability to convert some of our schools, our expansion to be able to partner with other entities who would then be able to utilize this space grows. A few years ago, we started as it's probably 10 years ago, pre-K being part of an elementary school. And it's been interesting to see it evolve, that although at the beginning it was part of elementary school, there's been more and more of a need primarily from parents to really want to focus their children in an early childhood center rather than going to an elementary school. And so what started as kind of pre-K at each elementary school has turned into more of a hub of pre-K students. And that I think is based on some parent wishes, that they would like to have their 3- and 4-year-olds at their own site, as well as being able to utilize resources effectively, particularly with our developmental preschool, that we can have staff at a site that's able to respond to students without having to have one at 89 different elementary schools.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I think I have 2 more questions. So I also did find it interesting looking at the feedback that came from the community as to what they were looking for. Overwhelmingly, I heard that there was a need for CTE. And again, there was no recommendation to utilize any of these facilities for that specifically. So I don't, again, I don't know if there's a separate.
So, Board Member Jackson, there is CT being again very specific. The Board of Education and administration. On Friday, you will be seeing the opening of the new transportation centers. And for those like, I think, Mrs. Mueller-Aragon and Board Member Montoya and Board Member Peterson and Board Member Dominguez, you will see 15 to 20% of that site was specifically acquired with a mind to stand up CTE hub, which will not only serve the education of students, but will be able to hopefully do things like develop heavy diesel mechanics, bus drivers, and work with a business community to and the unions to come up with an apprenticeship program. And so that's in the works. It's not in this right sizing specifically because it's on another vein. But again, like Dr. Blakey said, as we go and approach these, you can see this is very comprehensive. It's very wide. As we go and approach these specifically one by one, those issues will be brought up, and a CTE strategy is going to be brought up by the administration and instruction.
And as part of the early childhood expansion proposal, we do foresee partnering with CNM, particularly to look at growing early childhood educators as part of a learning lab at these early childhood sites.
Sorry, there's nothing to read.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Let's see, I think, I guess probably the other question I have is if we're having to, this might be preliminary, but do we have a cost benefit analysis? Because I'm seeing a lot of needing to rebuild and needing to expand, but I don't see how, where is the cost savings coming? I see the output, but where's the benefit? Where's the savings?
So there'll be costs when we go into them individually. You'll see the technical cost saving analysis from the capital side, but there's also a specific cost saving analysis in consolidating schools.
Mhm.
You know, where you're talking about staff, principals, nurses, PE teachers, electric bills. Because what we are proposing over here is not only consolidating schools that are too small so that you can put them in one spot, but then bringing a new population that will recurringly run the schools, the spaces that have been vacated. So this is a very expansionist kind of proposal in terms of we're consolidating what is too small right now and proposing to bring in new students and new FTE to run what has been vacated.
Mm-hmm. So you're this is our 10,000 foot view, and you're saying that what's coming is the specifics as how much this is going to cost and how much we're going to save
Yes, for each specific.
for each school. Okay.
Board Member Jackson, we can break it down by each school, like they said, as we get to it. As we've said all along, this is not a huge, it's not a great way to save money in the sense that if you have 100 teachers or 100 kids and you have 5 teachers, when you move the 100 kids, the 5 teachers go with them because you got to still have the same teachers for the kids. What it does though, for the receiving school is one, it gets some renovation. So it's a little bit spiffed up. And 2, it hopefully allows them to begin to add programs that maybe they wouldn't be able to have in a very small school. You're really limited when you have a staff of 5. You know, you just really are stuff. But now you've got kids having access to a full-time librarian, full-time nursing services, full-time community coordinator. There's a lot of ancillary staff that come along with that benefits, I think, the students on that regard. So, and it allows us to sort of consolidate those. So if I have maybe 2 half-time at 2 schools and one, they become 1 full-time and then the other one becomes a full-time somewhere else, it's just it's better. And it creates a more comprehensive and cohesive setting for the students.
I'm done. Thank you.
Board Member Dominguez, you're like chomping at the bit there.
Because I do want to, I heard early on, cost benefit analysis, and then it became strictly a cost analysis. And then Superintendent Elder ended with the benefit analysis. I think it's going to be, for me, very important that you highlight in that cost analysis a definite benefit analysis. Because I think that's part of it. In the long term, there is a benefit. I have, and I don't know if I have a question about this or just I want to note a concern. I think I wrote down the question, but it's gotten lost in notes. I just want to be certain that we avoid displacing local neighborhood children when Janet Kahn becomes an open boundary school, that we make every effort to avoid a waiting list for local kids, and that we are encouraging local neighborhood kids to be included. And I think Mr. Garcia is ready to address that.
Ready to talk.
Board Member Dominguez, members of the board, we were also concerned for that very reason about, really making these boundary magnet schools and then excluding the same kids that, are part of the neighborhood. So really providing the opportunity for those students who live and reside in that community, entrance into the school, and then doing a facility utilization study to find out what the total number of students in that school can occupy. Once we allow all of the students who reside in the community, we would take the number of requests that are from outside of the community, and we would do a lottery for those students who are outside of the community, pending the total number of interested students and the number of available seats. But we're looking at probably years down the road until we reach that full facility
Capacity.
utilization. So what Dr. Blakey also explained is that we're going to try to create super stops for students that reside in the community, but also outside of the community, so we can ensure access for those students into these schools.
And so conversely, and I just lost that thought. It had to do with who else did we talk about? With so much movement, right? I think there's an opportunity to meld transportation limitations, particularly with regard to charter schools, especially in the Northwest Valley. With all this movement, I know we have one charter school that could afford to increase its Hispanic population, and I think this right sizing affords us. I don't know what the relationship is, how that goes, how the conversations go between APS and charter schools, but to get demographics to reflect more the neighborhoods.
Board Member Dominguez, I'd like, and members of the board, just to expand on your thought just a bit. So really, magnet schools are offering theme-based instruction that attracts students like a magnet. And really, we want to try to have our magnet schools diverse by recruiting and retaining students from well across the city. We're in a very competitive landscape right now in education. Many families really like having a portfolio of choice options. And I believe in us expanding on that, we're going to be a bit more competitive, but just also knowing that the schools that we chose to be, non-boundary magnet schools when you look at our trend data, many students leave the district after 5th grade. And what are we going to do as a district different to retain our own students and also provide an expansive portfolio of choices for these families? I think this might bring us back into a competitive edge, not just for parochial schools, but also charter schools in the district. And we want to be competitive like charter schools, like also parochial and other schools, really providing that landscape of choice and rigorous programs.
And I just remembered what eluded me earlier. So we were talking about creating an extension, bilingual magnet school extension to Coronado. And so that's Taft Middle School. How will we ensure that the neighborhood schools that feed into Taft get some opportunity to be part of the Taft bilingual magnet curriculum?
So pending those students' interests, they would also be part of the magnet. Now, depending on where they're at as far as bilingual education, it would be a 50-50 model. So meaning that students would have instruction 50% in English and 50% in Spanish. So pending if those students and families would choose that model, that might be a determining factor. But again, like Dr. Blakey mentioned, the corridor of the 3 middle schools in that area, they would also have the choice to go to Garfield STEM magnet school as well.
So they'll have Garfield as a STEM and then Taft as the bilingual. I guess what I'm asking, this is emerging as I'm asking these questions, is Taft has which elementary schools feeding into it? I don't know that right off the top of my head. How do we afford those kids the opportunity? Is it Corrales?
There's a number, they've got it.
I believe, and I'm listening to Los Ranchos and Alameda feed to Taft
Alvarado.
and some of Alvarado. Can you hear?
And some
Yeah, she just needs to come up to the. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah, so I don't know if you heard, but yeah, some of the students from MacArthur, some of the students from Alvarado, Los Ranchos Elementary, and then Alameda.
But the reality of that is that we're seeing a lot of those schools opt out instead of going to Taft. So we're seeing, we
Opt
do
out of what?
going to Taft.
Okay.
Grade, yeah,
They-
they're opting out of.
They opt out after 5th grade and they go elsewhere. So the idea here is by creating pathways to 2 magnet schools potentially, as well as Taylor, which
Right.
would then pick up the general population, gives us an opportunity to be more competitive with the local charter school that's down there, quite frankly, taking quite a few of our kids. This will also allow the continuation of the curriculum at Coronado, which you all have pointed out is one of our best and most desirable magnet schools. And those parents drive their kids. They're from all over. We actually charted them. So they're from all over town. So this would just be a continuation of moving their kids to the school to receive the services they want.
And I guess my question is, how do we create a system, right? A situation whereby the kids from Los Ranchos, Alameda, Alvarado, MacArthur, how do we get them to be able to tap into this great Taft bilingual magnet? Because we want to set them up to be able to participate.
It's true, and Board Member Dominguez, members of the Board Superintendent Elder, right now Alvarado has a fairly robust bilingual program. It is not the same, it's not a dual language program like at Coronado, but they do run a program. Alameda this year lost their heritage speaker allocation. That person left after the school year, so we've had to adjust the model, but the students are there and there is the desire. We would need to increase a little bit of that focus at those other 2 schools that you mentioned.
Okay.
And additionally, those students would be zoned then to go to Taylor. So they would be going to Taylor and Taft are about a mile away from each other. So the students that would choose to have a more traditional middle school experience would go to Taylor based on their location.
And is Taylor looking at a focus of something to attract?
I think Taylor is looking at being like the comprehensive middle school experience, traditional middle school experience for those students who should choose a non-magnet or non-focused school. They also serve as a special education hub for zone 3.
Okay, let's see, how can we?
We can always come back to you. So maybe
Okay.
we could go down. So Board Member Tapia Romero, I'm excited to hear about early childhood. I really am.
So one of my big concerns, and I believe you all should be familiar with it, is the Pre-K Act that's in statute where it says that we have to have a 50-50 split between public pre-K and community-based private programs. Going forward into this, it looks like we would be potentially violate with the Pre-K Act, what's in statute, because we would no longer share equal numbers based on what's happening in community-based programs. Has that been looked at?
I don't know from the programmatic side of early childhood. That's why I'm looking at Ms. Dr. Blea and Dr. Segura, if they know from the programmatic side of the early childhood.
It has been discussed. I would say about a year ago, we came into a conversation about this. I think it was about that time we discovered that there was an element of the law that asked us to go out and talk to the private providers and let them know what we were doing. I think this will be pretty gradual. I don't think you're seeing an intentional, it won't be a massive movement. It could eventually. My feeling is the market will probably play some role in how we ultimately end up and how many of these we end up with. But at the moment, we do know there's a large percentage of students who are not being served by either groups. And I don't think it's a lack of willingness on either end. It's a lack of facilities and people. And we are, with the hubs, it gives us an opportunity to pull people together. So instead of having small programs at 50 schools, we can have robust programs at a number of schools across the city. So I think the numbers in some ways will balance out a little bit and it'll include some of the numbers we have currently. But yes, we are looking at bringing in more students. And that's sort of our job as the administration, is to kind of look at how can we increase student enrollment. So we would have to work with the private providers as far as how they intend to, I guess, keep up. But this would be our opening steps to solve a number of problems.
Well, and you kind of led me into my next question, because you said there should be conversations taking place with the community-based providers, which in my experience, those conversations have not taken place because many of the programs within those areas have openings. They have not been filled completely. And to know, again, that we're going to put new hubs in these places, yet current programs that are already open still have openings. And again, it didn't really answer my question regarding the Pre-K Act. That's in statute. So legally, we have to abide by 50% in public, 50% in private. And when you say they can't keep up, essentially, if spaces aren't being filled currently, they're not going to be able to expand at the rate of what you're talking about on both ends and us still be able to meet the requirement of the law.
Our goal then would be to, like I said, on our end, it's to provide services for kids. That's really our role. We can follow the law and we can certainly look at the legislature and see if there needs to be any sort of modifications to help advance that. The plan simply takes into account that we have a need to, I think, to service children better. The idea of hubs seems to make sense because, again, it provides the ability to group people with talents and skills, as well as have all the stuff in one place. So there's that. If the law forces us to, have more community meetings, which I think we're more than happy to do. I do know, I think part of the problem is we don't have anyone currently in the role. Is that correct? So we're still looking for someone. So we've got different levels of people managing the program at the moment. So that's sort of what our stall is on who's managing this, because we don't really have a person totally in effect. But this is the capital end of it, the instructional end of it. And I appreciate you bringing up that we'll have to maintain an eye on that act as well. I can tell you that Mr. Wajenje just looked it up on his phone. He's busy. No, he's not. So, no. We'll definitely read it again. But I know we bumped into that last year. We tried to open a hub at a school, and somebody said, well, you didn't follow this step. And so we have to become more familiar with those steps as we move forward.
Right. And then I guess as you're talking, it's adding more additional questions that aren't even on my list here, because when you say that we don't even have somebody in place now to manage that particular department, yet we're looking at building it out extensively, and knowing that we're adding additional 3 and 4-year-olds to our schools and within an early childhood program, yet these districts that we're in now are not meeting proficiency. They are low attendance programs, and we're going to draw an additional age group who are not even currently meeting the need of the age that's there now. So it concerns me, especially as we draw forward to really focus on student outcomes, that why aren't we making sure that the group that we are already charged with our responsibility to make sure that they're proficient, yet now we're going to add even younger children to the mix when we're not even doing what we're supposed to do now. So I don't know, what is our plan to ensure that the 3 and 4-year-olds are having proper student outcomes if our K-5 students at those schools currently do not?
Well, what we know, and again, I don't have it in front of me, but what we do know, board member, is that the students who've gone through comprehensive programs traditionally do better, and that could be private or public. We obviously are biased a little bit on our end toward the public programs, but we know that providing those services in early age, investing in early childhood, investing in literature, and this will help us, especially in areas that we're seeing struggles. And hopefully, I would think that if you were a family member and you lived there and it was easier to get your pre-K student there, you might be more likely to come. So
Yes
I'll do
and
that.
no,
And then-
because again, I'm looking at student outcomes and exactly what is that school producing and how proficient are the students currently. I look back when I had young children, my daughter did not go to the school, even though it was right there in our district, based on the outcomes of the school. So I was willing to drive across town to ensure she had the education I felt that she deserved. Granted, I know we're making steps, but I don't think that's always a deciding factor when families are making that decision for their students. So I just disagree with that. When we look at, again, I want to touch back on, have we looked at the availability and the openings for early childhood in those specific districts? Because I know you mentioned we have 14,000 3-year-olds, but I'm talking specifically in that district alone, and what is the unmet need?
Board member Tapia Romero, yes, we have. We have done in-depth analysis to look at how many 4-year-olds there are in all these districts. And in fact, what we found is that the most 4-year-olds are in districts that are not served by either public or private providers. And this is because the current paradigm of early childhood in New Mexico before the constitutional amendment was mostly basing early childhood service on socioeconomics.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ms. Courtney Jackson's district and Ms. Peggy Mueller Aragon's district by far have the most thousands of potential students. And the reason we are doing this is right now they're not served by anybody. Now, I age myself, I go back to 2004, 2005, when you remember it used to be half-day kindergarten, just like, and it was based on socioeconomic kind of matrix. and Title I and all that. And then the legislature came in just like this time, although this time it's a constitutional amendment, but they came in and they made it whole day kindergarten. And what happened is still being felt right now. When they said all day kindergarten, they realized that they don't have the facilities and the teachers for what they have created. What used to be half-day kindergarten was served by half the teachers, and it was only in areas that were eligible. What happened is that they made it universal, and all of a sudden, most kindergartens were in the Northeast Heights and the far west side and in the Middle Valley. And what the legislature did at the time is to scramble and get, at that time we had oil and gas money too, just like now, and they got portables, kindergarten portables, statewide, and tried to install them. They hadn't finished installing all-day kindergarten portables by 2014. And so with this, we realize early childhood is not kindergarten, it's not elementary school. So it will be a lot more comprehensive, and we want to be ready. We've been working on this for about 6 years. And in fact, some of our prototype designs we've shared with school districts across the state. And some of them are already doing what we're proposing to do. Santa Fe, Rio Rancho, Roswell, and they were doing it in anticipation to the day when there'll be mandated early childhood across the state. What I tell a lot of, like we've had this same conversation with the city and the county because they were worried. They said, if you guys are going to do hubs, what happens to our sites? And when I show them the numbers and tell them, there is not enough of all of us to serve what is coming. It's a tsunami. It's a tsunami of kids. And we will have to work together with non-public, public providers, institutions, in terms of what these hubs will do so that we can know who'll be doing the childcare part, who'll be doing the education part, who'll be doing the security part, who'll be doing the facility part. And it'll take the resources of all of us to get this done, because there's a lot of kids. You know, we're going to jump from 2,000 kids to 14,000 kids. And this will be done in phases, probably over the next 6 to 10 years. And right now, if you ask PED or the new ECCD, the new department, they don't know how this will roll out. And I think communities that are ready and have a plan, that's possibly what the legislature will go with.
And my final question though, but I want to make sense of this because I feel like I'm receiving contradictory information, because tonight you're saying we're going to have a tsunami of enrollment and there's going to be so many kids that need to be served. Yet in previous conversations throughout this past year, we talked about declining birth rate, why kindergarten enrollment is at an all-time low, yet we suddenly feel like it's going to be filled with pre-K, with early childhood hubs. So where did these children suddenly come from?
The 14,000 we're talking about are already there. They're just not served. Most of them stay at home. Some of them come to providers based on the current paradigm. You got to qualify to get into early childhood right now. And so
Yes and no, not completely. But again, I want to just clarify. We've said this since I've been on the board for the past year, that enrollment is low. A huge reason was to declining birth rates, and that's why kindergarten was so low. But now we are assuming that it's going to have this skyrocket jump, tsunami of attendance is what you said. And I don't know how, now where did the shift come from?
Board Member Romero, sometimes you have to translate a little bit. We aren't prepared to serve those kids. We're prepared to serve children when they come to us in kindergarten. We have the infrastructure, we have the teachers, so those kids are coming. we're not prepared at the early childhood. So when he talks about this is where it's going to be only at that impact. The other thing we think, and this is a belief, is that by bringing those kids in early, that they'll become more committed to APS and more committed to the school. So if they're attached, if you get attached to a school, you start to meet people, build relationships, that they'll stay. We have kids leave us prior to coming in as kindergarten. They join charter schools, they go to private schools, they Catholic schools, whatever it is. This will give us an opportunity to touch, hands with the community in a very different way. So that's where the tsunami is. It's at the pre-K level. It's not necessarily we're suddenly going to be inundated at every other grade level.
Hold off. Go ahead.
I'll go to the far end. Board Member Mueller-Aragon.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of piggyback on what Member Tapia Romero was saying. So right now, in 2022, 2023, we have 4,776 kindergartners. We have 1,828 preschoolers. So I too just can't see the numbers that you're predicting. I don't see them there. So then the other question to go along with that is I know we don't have that many places for preschoolers, like I understand that. And perhaps that's why we just have the 1,828 pre-K students. So I'm sure that somebody knows this. How many pre-K students are on a waiting list for APS pre-K programs?
So let me take the first question first. So I
Okay.
think that what's the question that Board Member Tapia Romero and you are asking is, with preschool, what we're talking about is 3 and 4 year olds.
Mhm.
So if you combine 3 and 4 year olds with approximately 5,000 kindergartners we have each year, then we're only serving 1,000 students. But we know that there's the combination of 3 and 4 year olds out there that are in various places or not anywhere at all. So the combination of number is 2 ages of 3 and 4 year olds, and then it's like funneled into just the kindergarten number. So I think that's where the number is coming from. But at the next meeting or study session that you have, we can go over the complete early childhood proposal, along with because we're presenting from the capital side. And a lot of the questions regarding like the programmatic side, which of course is really important to the plan, I think would be more of an in-depth study with bringing Dr. Segura's team in on. As far as the question regarding the sites that are full, we have some sites that have, it's dependent on the site. So we do have several sites that do have waiting lists, and then we have some sites that do not.
Right. And so I know this as well. And also kind of speaking to what has already been, my fellow board members have already said, is many of those, and I know this from parents wanting their children to be in a preschool, an APS preschool, but a lot of the openings are in schools where the children at those schools are not doing as well academically or on tests. And you already know what I think about tests, but so those are, and I don't know if it's true, and that's something that you can let us know, are those schools don't seem to have their pre-K as filled as other schools where this children may be doing better academically. So that's something else that you can bring to us as well. And it speaks to what has already been said about that as well. How are we going to draw kids into some of these hubs when we're not drawing the kids because those schools may not be doing what some parents, feel is the right thing for their children. So that's something you can, present to us then as well. And I know a lot of the things that I have questions of are things that we will do I'm sure in the work study group too. But when it comes to I too, like Member Jackson, don't understand. And after speaking to a whole lot of commercial realtors who think that it would be some of the places that we have are some of these schools are places where there is nowhere for them, for the neighborhood to grow. Now on the west side, there's place for it to grow, but some of these don't. So I see that if we sold some of those schools, that it would bring the possibility of building new neighborhoods in areas where there isn't space for new neighborhoods. And we all know how housing is really lacking in our city. And so that's just something I would like you all to just keep in mind, that maybe that would be something good for some of these neighborhoods. And we'd obviously have to study, which neighborhood might that be helpful to. I know some developers would love to be able to build neighborhoods, and I'm sure that you can see that across the country in some of the infill that has happened. Like you can look at Detroit, and you can look at some of those places where they did build, these neighborhoods to try to draw people in. So that's just a thought. When I'm looking, and this is something I know you already said you're going to talk about, and I'm just going to kind of go through some, that way you all have it. I know these are questions you don't, necessarily have answers to. I would like to know, what is the cost to, shuttering a school? How you find that it's not possible to make money on selling our schools. And also you already spoke to that cost savings and cost analysis that you'll present to us. Also, in repurposing and, doing some of these rebuilds, we know we have less students. I know when I started on the board almost 8 years ago, we had like 86,000 and some students. And then when I'm looking at SAPR now, we have 71,119 students. That's like 15,000 less students in less than 8 years. And that's big. I just don't know where we are going to get these students to fill some of these hubs, when I know that there are so many, as Member Tapia Romero said, there's so many openings and so many education, early childhood centers across the entire district. So I want to know how much square footage. So some of these schools are going to have to be knocked down and rebuilt to serve the purpose that you all outlined. So I would like to know how much square footage we're going to lose, or possibly maybe how much square footage we might gain. I would assume that everything is going to be built smaller than the schools are currently. That's just my assumption, but I don't know that that's the case. I know that we're going to need staff at these redesigns, buildings. So are we going to, with less students, are we going to gain staff? Is it going to basically stay the same? Because it's not, I just don't see us coming up with thousands of more early childhood children. And then the other question that you can let us know about is, in each of these redesign builds, give us an idea of what the enrollment you think is going to be. So how different is it going to be? I mean, Duranis has, I think, 130, I'd have to look it up. I went through that this afternoon, 131 students. So is the redesign there going to have more than 131 students? And what's the square footage and the cost and the benefit, et cetera? I want also to know what the cost up front for the redesign for each of these that you've presented, and what, I know you can't tell me exactly, but what the cost would be to operate, these new buildings. Let's see. And then the other question, I know you mentioned Alameda, that it's built on a burial site. So is that going to limit everything going forward for what we can do at Alameda when it comes to, rebuilding, tearing things down? So we're going to have to leave the school the way it is forever?
Correct to a certain point. You have to be very careful. It's a long process before you disturb what you need to disturb. You have to work with the University of New Mexico, with the state, and
that's just right. That's the right thing to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so to go and do a total, even if we were, say, to put this school out for hypothetically for disposal, whoever will get it will have to go through the same things.
Right. And they
so-
should know that.
Yeah.
If that's what they choose to do, they would know they would have to do that, which is, I'm sure they would do the right thing as well. So then, this is just something that I thought about as you were talking about so many K-8s. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just remember, I think it was, when Raquel was superintendent, that because these schools had gotten it was just like overwhelming. They were just so big. I thought that the decision was made to not have any more K-8 schools. Is that incorrect?
So the K-8 schools that we're looking at is
On a smaller scale, I know.
K-8 on a smaller scale where the same students that are there from kindergarten would continue through 8th grade. I think the decision that was a K-8 where it's 6th grade, a new group of kids came in and then you see the growth. I think that was where the previous administration was calling a halt to. But a small K-8, we have particularly Corrales and Coronado, we have families begging for us to create a K-8 school for those. The intent would be for those kindergartners, students to stay all the way through 8th grade at those schools.
I mean, I know that's something that Corrales has, spoken about for a while. So I know that's something that they want. And I know a lot of the funding will be there. But I'm kind of looking at your timeline and I'm saying, is that really realistic for all these look for all of these redesigns? Is that truly, truly realistic? And you can tell me it is, and I'll be like, yay, that's good. Or you could tell me maybe it's not. I mean, that may change. I just want to make sure that we're giving information to the public that is realistic, because whatever we say, they're going to count on us doing what we're saying that we're going to do.
As you see in the timelines,
Mhm.
contingent on funding,
Right?
contingent on board approval. So these are recommendations, draft recommendations. You will be getting a recommendation, I think, Wednesday on Corrales and Duranes. We didn't want to bring this to you before we had this discussion.
Yeah. And I have got not a single solitary parent, community member that has said they don't want it. They all want it. So, which is good. You don't have to wonder what they want. So then the other question, and you can just refresh my memory, and I might have, I'm sure it's here. I've just been asked this question about boundary changes on the west side, because parents are getting very worried. And they were worried during the redistricting that it was going to affect school boundary changes. And I told them that the redistricting didn't affect school boundaries, that's a different process. So I want to be clear with them when and if we do these boundary changes for Terra Vista and Sunset View and Tony Hillerman and James Monroe and Cibola and Volcano, when would those definitely take effect? When are those parents going to know? I just had one parent that was going to be moving from the Cibola district, wanted to move to Volcano Vista district, and they were moving from Corrales. They want to know to make sure that they're going to be in, the Volcano district.
So just to clarify, these boundary, what we call rebalancing,
Right.
is an attempt to make sure that the feeders aligning the feeders so that kids, as much as possible, start at an elementary school to the same mid-school to the same high school. What has happened, you have kids on the edge who have to go from, some of them go to Tierra Antigua, and then they end up in Cibola. And then some of them, so we're talking about a minority of parents. We're not going to be changing the Volcano Vista boundary, the big boundary, or the Cibola boundary, but we're going to be trying to balance out the feeder schools so that parents have more of a regular path so that they're not as you know, and it's your district, there's a confusion sometimes, those parents on the north who, because of such overcrowding in the past, had to come to, I think it was Sunset View, then some of them go to Cibola, some of them Volcano Vista, some of them thought they were going to Volcano Vista, end up at Cibola. So we will bring some recommendation, and this will be administrative recommendations to the board to look at. And be
Okay.
as undisruptive as possible.
Okay, so when you're, Kazito, then, so when you're trying to tell me then is that you want the kids to stay, whatever neighborhood they're in, that they're just going to kind of stay where, right?
The
With their
feeder
feeders, they're
pattern,
going to
yes.
stay with that feeder
Align
pattern.
with feeder
So it then has nothing much to do with the number of students. And because obviously we know that Tierra Antigua has like 800 students or something, and that Tony Hillerman has way over 1,000, as big as some of our high schools has over 1,000 kids. So it's not going to really necessarily affect the enrollment then when you change that.
So in the issue of Tierra Antigua, you are right. It's almost at 1,000 again. And that's an issue for
1,035, it says on SAP.
Yeah, that's a new school in the future. I mean, we can't start moving them and bringing them back all the way to, say, Petroglyph. And then when we build a new school, we're then going to take them out of Petroglyph back to Tierra Antigua to the new school. This is an issue we haven't done. COVID kind of stopped things a little bit. Recession stopped things a little bit, but usually every 3 to 4 years, we usually bring a proposal to make sure that the feeder systems are balanced and there's as little disruption as possible.
Okay, I just want to make sure these parents that, that they know that as soon as possible. That would be very helpful to them. And then lastly is I just want to make sure that we're really looking at the economic feasibility of just not selling any of these properties basically and keeping them all. Is that really the right thing to do? And then my last, honestly, I have a whole bunch more, but I'll stop. My last question would be, I know when Ruben was here and he was looking, he put a lot of this together. Did you all use a lot of what he already had, or is this something like you're starting from scratch, or did you use a lot of the information he had? And I know some things have changed because that was several years ago.
Yes, we started with him on this, and then Scott came on, and then Gabriela is now leading it. It's actually building on the analysis that was started in 2014.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the analysis started in 14. We actually brought a presentation to the board in 17 with a number of proposals. And then I think the rubric has gone through some modification because the intent of the board's a little bit different each time. So, but yeah.
And then Scott, where did the right sizing rubric, where did that come from? Now that you brought that up.
That was a joint effort between departments.
Yes.
And
Okay.
we had principals, we had the planners, because the planners have a lot. We included our academic people, so we had a little bit of an academic element in there, but really at that point, it was more of a matter of really beginning to look at enrollment and how are we going to impact enrollment. At one time, there was more of a focus on trying to magnetize schools and try to lure students back. That is not proven as effective as we hoped, and the enrollment has continued to decline. So we stepped a bit away from that, although we have also changed the way we magnetize. Before it was more of a popcorn model where schools just popped up, there was interest. Now we're doing K through 12 continuum. So that's why you see the engineering the future and the cultivating the future proposal. So part of the reason that the magnet schools you see in here in this proposal are there is because we know them to be successful in our community already, and it's community request that they stay. So
Thank you.
Board Member Gonzalez.
Thank you. I think Mr. Wijinje, you answered this a little bit or alluded to it. But my first question is, could someone just please summarize, describe, and walk me through the timeline for the board role? So we're having this initial presentation tonight. We're seeing the rubric for the first time. You're saying there'll be votes on Duranis and Corrales coming up. What's the overall time frame, and what exactly does the board vote on and have authority over versus the administration?
Well, go ahead. We practiced. Go ahead.
We practice.
So the board has authority over the finance part of the plans as well as the boundary changes to the plans. The rest are administration recommendations, but certainly would get your feedback and know what the wants and needs of your community are before moving forward. But so the finance part, for example, of Duranis is to begin design of an early childhood center. So that would go to the board for a vote as far as the design of an early childhood center, as well as any of the boundary votes. So for example, if we were to unboundary Janet Kahn, we would need the board to vote on the new boundary for the elementary school in that area.
Thank you. And I guess this is that's sort of related to my second question is what sort of guardrails might be in place to inform the decisions, the directions, the rubric, et cetera. And so I ask because a best practice is to give preferential treatment to students who are in a closing school to select the next school. So essentially operating like an open enrollment system solely for those kids. So if a vacancy exists anywhere in the district, those kids have basically first opportunity to claim it. So have you thought about that as well versus just putting them in the nearest geographically school?
At this point, we had thought about putting them in the nearest geographic school. But if the plan is moving forward, that they would have option to move sooner than if they were to wait for the school to close. So for example, if the students at Duranis wanted to go to Reginald Chavez and we knew that the school was going to be repurposed, we would be able to move them. We haven't had discussions about that, but it certainly wouldn't be off the table as far as the preference. I believe it would come to the board in that sense because there is a policy about transfers for students. So we would have to look at the transfer policy to add the preference of a transfer for students whose school was repurposed or closed.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's definitely worth considering. So certainly should a student at Duranis want to go to Coronado, perhaps they get first option there. My third question is just sort of on community engagement broadly, and community engagement. Whom have you spoken to? Who has been engaged within the community? Who has been a part of this process so far? And what thoughts or recommendations do you have on how we engage the community from here forward?
So, Board Member Gonzalez, members of the board, when we initially did the analysis in 2017, 2018, we commissioned a survey called the Voice of the Community Survey to ask the community what works, what doesn't work, what they'd like to see. And we did this by zip code. We did this by area, by zip code, by school types. And what we intend to do moving forward, Dr. Segura and Mr. Garcia are intending to commission another Voice of the Community survey or something of that sort as to, it's been 3 years later, the things that were talked about in that survey still pertinent? Are there any more new issues that are going to come up? And I think the survey is something that we're going to make available to the board again. It's very interesting in terms of different parts of the city want different things. Whether it's CTE, whether it's music and art, it's concentrated a little bit differently.
I guess, sorry, if I could just clarify. So thinking specifically about these schools and these communities, if Mr. Candelaria over there runs an article tomorrow that says school board considers proposal to close Duranis Elementary, Kirtland Elementary, et cetera. Will that be the first time that those school communities are hearing that?
So the school communities, yes. So the next phase is for us to build a school community. That's the next phase in the process, is to build a school committee that then would look at the process of repurposing that school. So for this particular meeting, this is the principals are aware of it. The community is going to be aware of it tomorrow. And then the schools that are earliest on the timeline would be the ones that would start with that school committee to talk about it. So in that school committee meeting, they could say, Duranis, we're really interested in going to this school, or we're really interested to see what are the possibilities. And that's at the point where we would talk to the families about what their interest is in the next school and repurposing that school.
Okay. So that's what I was asking about time frame. Are there any other components of the process related to community engagement that you haven't spoken to already besides these school communities?
Yeah, just the committee. And then we have you, I mean, luckily this past semester, we have received a lot of opportunities to listen to the community and what they're looking for. So it has been hard to run our committee at the same time to make sure that we're still adapting to the previous. So that's why this is it's a draft. This is the first time it's in front of you to get your input on questions that you have, concerns you have. Is this matching the needs that you're hearing from your communities? Is it completely off base? Are there different needs? And the only thing that I would say wouldn't change is the schools that were identified, because that was done with a very methodical technical evaluation. So those schools are really kind of the tight of what we're looking at, but the timeline and what will repurpose with each school is still fluid as we go through each school individually in further meetings.
Great, that's helpful. And then so to answer that for you and sort of respond a little bit to some of the other conversation around early childhood hubs, what I hear a lot from my community about is a desire to have the early childhood spaces in the elementary schools so that kids can go for their 3-year-old year, 4-year-old year, 5-year-old, kindergarten first, et cetera. So worth considering the value of adding on early childhood space in K-5 settings or K-8 settings versus otherwise, but to be considered. My other question is, I'm curious about the broader middle school strategy and how that fits into this. So Superintendent Elder, you've spoken about a middle school task force. And as we're talking about bringing families back into the district, it's clear that one of the leakiest points in the pipeline is middle school. So with so many kids leaking out right there, it doesn't seem to me that just turning Taft into a bilingual magnet will be the solution that we need for middle school. So it'd be great to hear about the broader middle school strategy and how that connects to this.
Yes. Good evening, everyone, Board Member Gonzalez and members of the board. I have had the honor of being a part of the middle school redesign team, and we just wrapped up our last convening last week and have some recommendations to be able to bring to you all. We are first taking them to cabinet for discussion and consideration. But ultimately it's looking at, when we look at enrollment drops, we looked back way like in 13-14 up until now, it's very clear that there is a drop from 5th grade to 6th grade, and then it jumps way up to 9th grade, and then it trickles down to 12th. And so with that, we prioritize, what are let's just reach for the stars and see what do we feel, putting our middle school hats on as students, what we experienced, knowing that that's a really critical developmental time in students' brains, hormones, all of that fun stuff. You have to really love to be a middle school teacher. And so with that, looking at safety, a lot of families, and I was one of them, not in this district, but in general, who did not feel that the middle school that my kids were going to be attending was safe, because it was, there were just way too many kids. Classes were full, kids were sitting on floors. and it just did not feel good. And when my kids said it didn't feel good, that was a worry. As a parent, you want to protect your kids. So we are looking in the middle school task force at what does that look like? What does safety look like? And first and foremost, how are we communicating what our middle schools, what programs they offer, what structures they have in place? So I don't think we've done a very good job in promoting what our middle schools do have, and inviting the community into our middle schools to feel what that feels like. But ultimately, knowing that relational capacity is number one at any grade level, no matter what. So our teachers really building those strong bonds of respect with students. We are looking at that family model, like the smaller learning community, where the 4 academic core classes would have a pure group of students that they would teach, so that they could another proposal meet in their PLC groups to discuss student work, behaviors, any types of interventions that they need to put in place for certain students, and looking at student data. And so those are some of the pieces that we discussed, but also the issue of, because our kids have so many needs and are changing so drastically at that middle school level, looking at their mental health, the social emotional supports. And so we also are recommending the support staff be put in place and be kind of a guardrail. So every middle school should have a counselor, a social worker, a nurse. Those we're calling them restorative coordinators, to be able to work on building that sense of pride and community in the middle school, where the kids feel like this is my family. I know I can go to these adults in my family if I need support, and that teachers have a better grasp and understanding of who their kids are and can collaborate with their colleagues to support those kids within that family. We know that some kids respond differently to different adults. And sometimes I would walk past a classroom and see a student throwing things across the classroom, and I would stop and look in the door, like, what are you doing? You would never do that in my class. So for teachers to be able to collaborate and problem solve, and to bring kids in and support them on a different level, I think could be really impactful. But we have a proposal that we will be bringing soon for you all to look over. And we all know that budget impacts all of that. But if we know that there is a huge need to support our middle school students, and that's where we're losing, then we really need to put our focus and really invest our resources in those areas.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I agree. And so it is helpful to see or hear at least comprehensively a strategic vision for how this might all fit together, so that it's not just the right sizing here and middle schools here and social emotional over there. My last is just a comment and not a question. So I did mention that a best practice in school right sizing is to give students and families the choice for where they go next. But another best practice that I hope we could consider as well is just navigators for families in those schools, so that they have essentially counselors to help them understand what's happening, to help them understand their options, to help them really comprehend everything, but also navigators that extend into the next setting. So once a family moves from one school into the next, the navigators continue to check in with them to make sure that the transition has gone well also. So that's certainly an expense, but potentially a role for school community coordinators. And I do think definitely promising and a huge benefit to know that some of these North Valley schools in particular could now have a librarian and a music teacher and a school community coordinator because right now they're too small. So just wanted to suggest that as another best practice that we might consider. Thank you.
Board Member Peterson.
So one simple question that I will leave for Board Member Montoya Cordova is POC and the CTE path that's developed and knowing what works. So I'll let her flesh out that question and look forward to hearing that, because I think it's important. I appreciate the work that's been done on this, that it's not just slash and burn. And what does right sizing, I mean, I have real issues with the fact that the chamber and the LFC think simply closing schools is somehow a panacea for solving all problems, and that we are not looking at declining enrollment as an opportunity to give more to the students that we do have. And it goes back to Yazi Martinez and what our obligation is to our students. We are not in a business. This is not a business. This is a mission that we have for educating children and being a real substantive part of communities. So when we start looking at closing schools, it is not a dollar symbol that we should be looking at, but rather really and truly, what does this mean for the community? And if I start looking at the overlay of socioeconomic status of communities and where we are talking about closing schools, there is a correlation. And I think the reality, and just knowing Kirtland Elementary, yes, it's school, yes, it's small, and yes, it struggles with the issues of how do we have a fully staffed school for a small number of students, and that is a reality. It is a reality. I can recognize that, but I also know that community, and that is a community that has very few access points to community services. It's a community that has huge transportation challenges. It's a community where having parents' ability to walk to school with their child is the only way that they can have that connection with the school. And the school recognizes that and works at developing it. So it is not simple, and the impact of the schools that we close will have an oversized impact on the communities that house those schools, because they are schools that overwhelmingly do not have the access to transportation, to other community resources. So, and I do sort of echo parents' desire to walk into a school and know that their child can be there. I mean, Corrales speaks to it wanting to go K-8. Other communities that have other kinds of challenges look at it as preschool through 5. And so these are not simple, and it's not just a matter of the navigator. I look at Coronado, I am very concerned about the way the framework and the conception of magnets and changing Janet Kahn into a magnet, changing the given boundaries that include transportation and access. Coronado's free and reduced lunch population is 30%. The free and reduced percentage at Dolores Gonzalez, Eugene Field, Lou Wallace, and Longfellow is 100%.
East San Jose también.
So East San Jose. So we can start setting up very easily incredibly segregated socioeconomic status schools. And that is what some people want. That is what some people want. That is not what I think is going to serve our community best. And so I would really urge you to go back and look at how do we design a magnet school? How do we do that richness of development of curriculum, but maintain the community aspect of those schools? I don't understand why they have to be mutually exclusive unless our goal is to very intentionally establish segregation by socioeconomic status. You know, Longfellow was developed initially really and truly honoring the Martinez Town community, but also figuring out how how do we enrich that program? How do we draw in more people? How do we take advantage of this being transportation wise, employment pattern wise, taking advantage of parents who drive into downtown? And it seems like the same kind of perspective could really be looked at, for instance, for Kirtland. I'm not absolutely categorically opposed to having preschool hubs, but I would like to see, because we do have some preschool hubs right now, and I would like a little bit of an analysis of what does it mean, where do those children go when they finish with the preschools? What happens to them? Do they, for instance, Valle Vista has a preschool hub. Do those kids tend to stay at Valle Vista? Do they go back to geographically where their other home school might be? Do they go someplace else? I think it would be helpful for us as we're thinking about the hub concept of what it really means. I can see advantages for it, but I'd like to see a little more thought for it too. As far as I'm really confused about this conversation around preschools. I mean, I really appreciate knowing that there's statutory language that says 50% funding is maintained in private community-based preschools and 50% can be public. I didn't know that. I think that's really informative. So there is protection no matter what. But the whole point of having preschools is to support the growth and development and success of the children who are in those schools. I mean, study after study, we know that the reason why so many of our children do not do well is because they can't access preschool services. And the whole point of expansion is to make it possible for those families who can't drive across town, who can't access preschool other places in their schools, so that they have transportation, so that they can get there, so that they can tie in to other extended service support for after school programs. I mean, the whole point is that we know one of the key factors is that so many of our children can't access preschool. We have got to open up. I mean, I think the strongest part of this redesign model is saying, let's really make sure we can give support and access to children for preschool. My one fear, and I think we do need to have real programmatic conversations, is that as soon as politicians start designing those schools, suddenly they want preschoolers to be doing what we used to ask second graders to do. And so I think programmatically, I want every preschool to look the way board member Tapia Romero's preschool looks, because it is doing for preschool children what should be done for them. And it's looking at developmentally appropriate practice. I want that for all kids. I want kids at Kirtland, at Whittier to be able to access that. So I mean, this whole thing has to be in the model of how do we make everything better. I think preschool is an absolutely key part of that. And and just my final rant, because I realize this is a rant and not a question session. I apologize for that. But Los Padillas, Whittier, Hawthorne all taught us that when we carefully design instructional program, when we invest resources, when we put good leadership in schools, we turn schools that are struggling into schools that we can be truly proud of. And so, I mean, I just want all of this to be focused on how do we do that for every school? And that's what the real question is. How do we do that for every school? So the redesign, we're going to have to work with communities, because I'm real concerned looking at Kirtland. It's a community that does not have resources, and their resources have to be supported.
Thank you. So I'll try to kind of wrap up where we are. I think you've got a lot of questions on the table. The only questions that I have, and it's sort of going into this whole thing, I'm struggling with the report because there's a whole section of this that is funded and a section that's not funded. And I can't really tell like what's the cost projection here for how much we have in the bank and what we can actually do and what's not funded. And what's the potential to raise those funds, like how and what's the timeline for that? That makes me nervous because so with the proposal that Duranis is going to come forward to us for, to fund a design, I'm like going, is that like the best use of funds? At this point, I don't know because I can't see it from the perspective of this plan. So we've got this plan and we kind of have to piece it together, and the way that it's being proposed to us in pieces just makes me uncomfortable because I don't know if I'm able to say that's the best use of funds at this time, or if that's, the only, I just need to see it comprehensively.
So the hard part with that, and we're certainly willing to adjust as necessary, is that one repurpose isn't contingent on the other. So they're all very separate. And that's why there's not like a comprehensive plan, because it's the Duranis repurpose is not contingent on the La Luz repurpose. So the since Duranis was the first one, kind of, that's why that was the design. What's going forward to you is the design of a prototype for the early childhood center, and that's with ESSER funds.
Okay.
So there's nothing that is in that that is connected to construction for it. It's the design. That prototype would be used for the other future ones too. But for each one, that's why we recommend going through each one individually in different meetings, or doing like 2 at a time, because pulling all the early childhood together would make sense, because they're all different and they're not contingent on each other, even to the extent of early childhood. We're giving you a comprehensive plan of building out 12 early childhood centers to also doing 1 early childhood center. So each one is separate and they're not contingent on each other.
And I think the other part that concerns me, though, is for those that are unfunded. So let's just take a look at the Polk and piece. Every year through these phases is unfunded. And so are we really going to restructure? Because I don't know how we would raise those funds is what's concerning to me. And so the timeline is not, I look at the 4th phase of, 3rd and 4th of actually opening, but we have unfunded pieces here. So that just kind of worries me, because I know with this community too, in terms of promises made, promises kept, and how long it takes to get something done of this magnitude is going to be difficult, because that construction and that facility at Los Padillas is pretty old. That's a lift, I think, in terms of what is out there. It's a beautiful piece of property. I have no doubt that the vision for using the wetlands and all of that's beautiful piece of property, as is Polk. Polk is a beautiful piece of property. But I'm struggling with that. And then but I think, with the work group committee, we could sort of work through what some of the concerns are that I have from my perspective, and what I think the community's perspective is that also this, push to new futures out at Polk Middle School makes no sense to me at all, because I think of young parents and I think of access to what they need in terms of career readiness and the things that they're going on. Polk is not even close enough to anything. It's close to a CNM campus. There's no doubt if there was some like structuring for that, but I can't feel the vision for it. So in my heart, I'm struggling with that part, because I just don't see how that could even be possible. Just given just how far it is from everything, because that's definitely a stretch in my mind. So for me, it's the finances, and I think everybody on the board is struggling a little bit with finances. And then for one of the things that I'm asking on this too, so how does all of this capital proposal piece fit with our capital master plan and the work there? Are we going to be delaying other projects? Are we pushing these projects up? What happens to that?
Thank you, President Yolanda Montoya Cordova. As you know, the capital master plan and the capital program is in support of the instructional master plan. And so you gave a very good example of Polk and Los Padillas, and Polk needing a lot of investment. We are at a juncture where, in terms of prioritization, we need to make a decision right now in terms of what direction we are going, so that as we move forward into the next capital plan, capital strategy, which the first election will be in 2024, we have collected and are sure about what it is that we are building or renovating, and how that will be in relation to where instructionally we are going. Because basically, we don't just want to build monuments to our own egos. We want to build something that will support the overall academic plan. And that's why this is being brought at this time.
Okay, we still have to talk about that, because I know for the community, this community, Los Padillas, which encompasses Polk, listening to this particular restructure for this is going to be, it's going to be hard for that community. This is it's a big shift for them. I understand why we're doing it too at the same time, because I know we're struggling mightily with the size of both schools. I mean, Polk is really a small, it's very small. And when it gets that small, it's hard to have the robustness. And you're talking about middle schools and just the structure that's needed. It's a beautiful school. There's no doubt that they're doing some amazing things, but there's definitely a huge gap. Los Padillas has definitely, on the other hand, kind of shifted itself because of the investments we made around the academic side and the programming side of it. It's got a nice feel in terms of the academics. But I'm really struggling with it, and I'm sure I'll field quite a few questions from the community that's really worried about that. And then I just want to say, Dr. Segura, thank you so much for sharing the pieces that you had on the middle school, because I agree completely that is where the gap, starts to hit with with the district. And I look forward to hearing the proposal in terms of that redesign, because it's time. It definitely is. Having a granddaughter in middle school right now, and hearing some of the struggles is definitely, it's been a tough couple of years, but we're plowing through it, and she's, it's going well, but you can see that shift in terms of what happens from, that K-5 space. Oh, the other question I have, doesn't Polk, not Polk, but Los Padillas, don't they have a pre-K as well already? They do, huh?
Yeah.
And it's important to know that most of our pre-K that we have, when Board Member Peterson was talking about the hubs, those are our special education hubs. So we have our whole side of the developmental preschools, and those are what the hubs are.
Okay. So, and I think it would be good to just sort of get the landscape for that. I agree, because it's kind of hard to figure. So if this was going to be changing to what's being proposed, because you're also wanting to put a hub in the South Valley, either at Polk or at Harrison, it confused me a little bit, because I thought, don't we already have one there?
So the hub
is different.
being used in different terminology. So the current hubs are our district preschool hubs for developmental preschool. Then we have future hubs, when we talk about the same word using hubs, is a comprehensive, including the developmental preschool program, as well as coordinating for like the city Head Start. Multiple people use our spaces for preschool. So like at Hawthorne, I'm familiar with, we have the city preschool,
Mhm.
and we have an APS pre-K site. So it's basically bringing them all into the same facility. Right now, it's very, if you go onto school campuses, you'll see, they'll say they're there to pick up their student for preschool, but there could be like the city preschool is over here, and then the APS preschool is over here, and then the Head Start preschool is in another. So it's
Okay.
basically hubbing all of those. When we say hubbing
Okay,
with these, it's hubbing all of those providers together in a facility.
okay. All right, and because I do find it, I mean, I just want to say too, a hub at, I think what's being proposed at Polk, I think that's what it says, right? A hub at Polk. I don't understand that one at all, just because of the distance from everything. I mean, that's not even on a major thoroughfare. It's far, you know, I mean, closer to Harrison makes a whole lot more sense because of the traffic patterns, but it's far. You're starting to get into the little village of Los Padillas. And I do see some similarities around the village concept like you have with Corrales, with the K-8 model, because it's, you know, it's a village model. It's folks that are from that community that live there. They, you know, I think there could be interest for sure to have that continuity. But I think what's going to be the struggle is because they already know they have a middle school there. And so the community engagement is going to be really critical in all of this, in this conversation, and I think just a reality check in terms of what the real timelines are here, because I don't believe, especially the timeline for this particular proposal on the table for this one, I just don't even see it. It just wouldn't happen that way.
We can go over them again as individual proposals, and the early childhood sites, as the committee looked at it across the map, it was developed with some background in some, like Seattle has done it, and other large cities, is looking at early childhood hubs as places on a parent's commute.
Mhm.
So you'll see some of those are intended to bring in people that might, even though Polk isn't ideal, it's intended on the map to bring in, if people are coming from Belen and Las Lunas into town to work. It's more on like the thoroughfares. Duranis particularly was looked at as far as it being near the interstate as far as parents. So the hubs aren't necessarily looking at how they are on a, like in the neighborhood. It was more intended for commutes to work. Kirtland, for example, the community has expressed that there's no early childhood access if you go towards the base for work. So that's where, so the hubs, and we'll go over it in a more in-depth, early childhood is designed more in traffic patterns for commuting.
Well, and there's definitely that science is there. I mean, in terms of commuting patterns, because we look at it at workforce, just in terms of where people are commuting from and how. But that commuting pattern into that particular part of the neighborhood has to be really intentional, because you have to come off an interstate, off a major thoroughfare to get into the middle. It's not an intentional, I mean, it's just a bedroom community. It's really small and it's not structured for that kind of piece at all, which, I mean, those folks are commuting out, you know, and going other places, but you don't necessarily have people commuting into that neighborhood. You have to be very intentional. If you're going to go to Abuelitas to go have a really good, you know, it's a great, you know, trip to Abuelitas and then to the Hubble House. You know, I just want to put a plug out for that community because it's really beautiful that way. But anyway, so I just want to say thank you too for the comprehensiveness of this discussion. I think it's been really helpful as a first iteration. I know we've asked for, you know, the board had asked about right sizing. I think for me, I will say this also from my perspective, when I thought of right sizing, I sort of thought like, you know, across the big district, I saw that you took scores. But I guess you'd have to figure out like, where would you start and how would you start? I appreciate the rubric and the pieces that were put in there. That makes a lot of it sense to me. So it's probably the best and easiest way to do a review for everything. I was surprised by what rose to the top and what didn't, I guess I could say too. I'm not surprised that this community in my district would come up. I think it's come up many times too. I think there's been conversations about the size, the small, what's happening there, and the reality of we've got really aging infrastructure at both of those, Los Padillas is so old. I don't even know. I can't remember when it was built. And Polk, so they definitely have some struggles there.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
I just so we can have some accurate numbers, I'm just on our website. And for example, Kirtland has openings in pre-K, Los Padillas in conjunction to Polk has openings in pre-K. Out of 54 of our sites, 21 of our pre-K sites have current openings. So we're halfway through the school year and 39% of our sites are not full. So that's something to look at again, when we're looking at districts that we're proposing to serve and the openings that we currently have at this point.
That's good. Thank you. All right. So thank you so much. And I'm going to go there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back up to the top. And this was where an announcement of a right sizing working group. And this is in alignment with the recent committee structure pieces that we had talked about. The capital outlay, the COPT, I can remember, Capital Outlay Property and Technology Committee is no longer a committee because it's not a standing committee. So we're going to create a work group on this particular piece. And what I have done on this one is I've asked Board Member Mueller-Aragon to actually chair this one. And what I'd like, what I thought would be appropriate on this, given the communities that are impacted the most, is that Board Member Gonzalez, Board Member Peterson, and myself would actually be members of that working group. That we would come together with the district, have some working meetings. Obviously, there's still 4 of us on it, so it'll still be announced as regular meetings. And this group on this side would have, you could attend if you choose and not attend. But what would happen is on our regular board meeting structure, we would have this as a regular update that the working committee. So in this case, Chair Member Mueller-Aragon, as the chair of this working group, would have some sort of report that you would be making to the committee regularly on that. But then again, we're going to announce the meeting still to be transparent, and for all the board members who'd want to participate could, but this group will be kind of like rolling up our shirt sleeves on this work.
So just a point of clarification, you use the word committee.
I keep trying to say it's hard to change. It's work group.
So
Work group.
Board Member Mueller-Aragon will report.
Yes, and she'll report on this working group on
Okay.
where we are. And we'll be adding it to our regular board meeting as an update as updates are coming through. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Any questions on that?
I don't have any questions on that, but I'm wondering if we could, there were a lot of action items that were kind of discussed during this part. And so I would appreciate it if either those action items were restated as to what we're hoping happens, or maybe that gets transferred over to Board Member Mueller-Aragon of the action items that are specific for the questions that we have, because I'm concerned that there were a lot of questions asked, a lot of we'll get back to yous. And I just want to make sure that those we got back to yous actually happen.
So one of the things that I can say, Board Member Jackson, is that in the way that we're restructuring our minute taking, what Johanna King is doing is capturing all the action items in terms of the conversation of what we said. I'm looking at you, and are you feeling confident there? That's what she's working on. So we're trying to restructure also the way that we're doing our board minutes, our minutes, so that it captures all that. And that will be part of what will be from all of our meetings moving forward is the guidance that we received in terms of coaching around the way that we structure our minutes as well. Our meeting is live and it's recorded. So we also put that out for transparency. And then when we review the minutes for this particular meeting, it'll have all of those action items on it as well. But we can also have Ms. King go ahead with her action items. It's still that they're not approved minutes, but the action items at least can be communicated and can be rolled up into the working group as we move forward. Unless you have some other suggestions.
No, I'm surprised that I'm pleasantly surprised that is happening. I was not aware that was something moving forward. So maybe that's something the executive committee needs to talk about or inform. So I was informed of that. I didn't know that.
All right. So let's see. So the discussion of upcoming work group meetings, I'm not going to have a discussion. Do you have something planned for a working group meeting for the next round?
No, that was actually, I was just going to ask Mr. Gingy, how do we plan when the next one is? Is it a standing meeting or how would you like to schedule them? Is it?
I'm going to ask our chair in terms of what would you prefer in terms of a frequency of this working group meeting. We're hoping we get to an endpoint, right? That's why this working group is going to have a begin, it's going to have an end. But the frequency of how regularly you'd like to meet on this, does the board have any suggestions on how often you think this work group should meet? No, I don't either. I think
at this point, it seems like there's a pretty long list of things that we asked for. So it seems like realistically, you should let us know what is realistic for being able to pull some of that information together. Meeting again without that would just make us rehash, I think.
We just have to meet before, if we're going to have a report out at a regular board meeting, we need to make sure that we obviously meet before that.
So I would say we schedule the next one like in a month from now, and then we schedule out from there and keep so that you're not getting them at the last minute, but that it would stay on whatever the day of the week is today. I just told somebody to have a good weekend, so I know today's not Friday. And we would like
the beginning of the week, it's Monday.
So I think we can work with the board office to put holds in for the future.
Okay.
That way, so that we at least just have holds on your calendar for it.
They just have that placeholder so that
Yeah.
nothing else is.
And it certainly can take the place of what used to be a standing committee that we called COPT, right? So for now, it could be that this is the working group's time in terms of the frequency and what needs to happen there. So that would be a way to also structure it. The good part here is that it won't be the board of the whole, won't need to do that. It's still going to have 4 members on it. So we're going to have to go through the trouble of just putting an agenda together so that we know what we're discussing. And then that way we'd have that for transparency. Go ahead.
And I think the reality is that those of us who have schools that are going to be impacted are going to need to be meeting with the community soon. And at this point, I mean, I think we can say it's in development. These are proposals. Nothing is set in stone. But I think the reality is we need to figure out how we are going to listen to the communities. I mean, and make sure that we do whatever possible, 1, to allay fears, and 2, to make sure people have a real honest way to give voice to the process.
And the committee has been working really closely with the zone associates, and you'll see Ms. Bell here too in a close conjunction with the school principal to make sure that it's connected to that work of the school. And through the zone associates, I feel like the staff and the community that's the best connection I feel to them giving their input and
they have a very good pulse of the school community.
And I would ask if the zone associate is like, if they're pulling together a community meeting where there's going to be an opportunity to hear the voices of the community, that we're just made aware of those so that we can attend those sessions and sort of listen to whether it's a conversation that's a guided or facilitated conversation around problem solving around this and getting input and ideas. I definitely think we should be invited to those so that we could be part of that conversation.
And when you say that it's
The board.
everybody?
The board. Yeah, I think we could certainly make it, just put some broad awareness that that's occurring. And of course, anyone that's interested in attending, and all of us, anyone who has an interest in that.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I know it's only one school in my district, but
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
but it's still important.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? Questions? No? All right. Staff, any other questions? We're good? I know this is a new structure for us. We're all learning. We'll figure it out. And if we need to, we can always have some coaching on us from the Council of Great City Schools to help us with this as we work through restructuring how we do work groups and such. So I appreciate everyone's flexibility on that. All right. So with this, I would just say that we are adjourned. We don't have to announce an upcoming meeting because we don't know when that's going to be. But we're adjourned. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here tonight.